Welcome to one of the past HSC exam question videos. In this video, we're going to cover this exam question, which comes from the 2002 HSC paper, and it's question 27, and it's worth 8 marks. So it is a 8-mark question, which means it's a very important, very big question. Alright, the question itself is evaluate the contributions made by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch to our present understanding of the cause and possible prevention of infectious disease. And it's worth 8 marks. So when you're ready, pause the video, and after you've paused the video, I will go through the marking guidelines and a sample answer in terms of how to get the full marks for this 8-mark question. But when you're ready, pause the video and attempt the question. Welcome back. Alright, so the question says evaluate, which means evaluate means we need to look deeply into evaluate the contributions. We need to look deeply into the contributions made by both these scientists, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, but also need to make our own conclusion. We need to at the end have a conclusion. Do we think those contributions were important or not important, and how important were they based on what kind of evidence, more or less, right? So the dot point, that was a question, and the actual marking guidelines say this: to get full marks, so 7 to 8 out of 8, we need to describe the work of Koch and Pasteur, right? So talk about what they've done and relate these to our present understanding of both the cause and the possible methods or of prevention of disease caused by microorganisms. Include a judgment of the impact of Pasteur's and Koch's work. So make the judgment, and that's part of evaluate, but also talk deeply about what they have done that has led to this better understanding, right? So we've got Pasteur on the one side. Pasteur's done quite a few things in terms of we need to talk both about the understanding, so about the cause, how these scientists have helped us understand what causes these diseases, and also how they've helped develop possible preventions of those same infectious diseases, right? So Pasteur, he did a couple things. First of all, he helped disprove spontaneous generation. Remember the experiment you've done, where you had the broth and then nothing grew? That's the experiment he did. And this experiment was really successful when it comes to showing that microbes could potentially actually be a cause of disease. Back then, before he was around, people did believe that people just became sick because of the air or random stuff. Whereas he showed, because he disproved spontaneous generation, he made that idea more realistic, that there could be these microbes that actually are causing disease. And that's one of his biggest contributions. He also helped to develop vaccines, which is again very important. He also helped develop ways to sterilize equipment and pasteurize water. So basically to prevent the spread of disease through killing pathogens. And then we've got Koch. Koch, his major one was the Koch's postulates, where he was working on with sheep back in the day when he was working with sheep and rabies. And he obviously really helped when it comes to the treatment and the prevention of disease, because in his case, the Koch postulates say that we know what kind of virus or what kind of pathogen causes what kind of disease. Before Koch, we had no way of figuring that out, and he did that whole thing with the Koch postulates. So we need to talk about Koch and Koch postulates and how that affects treatment and the prevention of disease, and also how that basically is the foundation of modern day immunology, which is the science of the immune system. Alright, so let's get started. So we've got first statement, it's just an introduction statement. Both Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch were scientists that lived during the mid to late 19th century, when knowledge of the cause and prevention of disease was still in its infancy, right? So back then, when they were alive, we didn't know much about what's causing disease and how we can prevent it. Both scientists contributed immensely by improving our understanding of what causes disease and how we could prevent it from occurring. Right? So those scientists then helped improve that basic understanding that was in its infancy back when they were alive. So that's just an introduction statement. Now I'll talk about Louis Pasteur specifically. Louis Pasteur was the first person to link microbes to disease. He helped disprove this theory of spontaneous generation, which was important, right? So by providing experimental evidence, remember the evidence that he gathered, which focused scientific research on microbes as a possible cause of disease. Because beforehand. People thought, the air was causing disease and all that kind of stuff. Didn't really know there were actual pathogens in the air that could be causing this. But because he disproved spontaneous generation and he focused scientific thinking onto microbes, that really changed kind of our understanding of disease. He also developed ways to sterilize equipment and water, which we call pasteurization, both of which help kill pathogens and thereby prevent the spread of disease. His sterilization techniques were and are still widely used in hospitals, which stopped contaminated equipment from being used on patients, right? So because of his sterilization techniques, we've basically made sure that people don't die from randomly being infected by old equipment or unwashed equipment. So he had a major contribution in that regard as well. He also worked on and helped develop the first vaccine that would ultimately make an individual immune from a disease caused by a specific pathogen, right? So again, more prevention work that he did. So that was all of the Louis Pasteur's work, and I went into a bit of detail in terms of what kind of stuff he actually did, working on the first vaccine and his experiment. He could have described them more if he wanted to, if he had the time. It's worth 8 marks, so you can always do that. But to talk about Robert Koch used the newly developed knowledge of the cause of disease to work on a system to identify what pathogen caused what disease. Now here you could have talked about a bit more about how he actually did it, with the actual sheep and the virus, or sheep and the bacteria. But I didn't do it in this case, but he definitely could have done a bit more in terms of talking a bit more about his actual experiment on the sheep. This system, also known as Koch's postulates, is still in use today and is the backbone of immunology. New treatment and methods of prevention are, in great part, thanks to the contribution of Robert Koch. Again, if you wanted to just expand that a bit about talking a bit about the actual what these Koch's postulates are in terms of the specifics. But if you didn't have enough time and you had just written this, you've still gotten your fair share of marks, if not full marks. But then what I did, I had a concluding statement, which I was meant to be putting in, because I said evaluate means you need to have a judgment. The scientific discoveries of both scientists have been absolutely essential for modern medicine and clinical practice to develop. Right? So modern medicine and these clinical practices would not be happening without those discoveries that were made by these two scientists. So therefore, many millions of lives would have been negatively affected, if not lost, had their contributions not been made. And again, if I wanted to, I could have gone into a bit more detail in terms of my judgment and saying, without them, science wouldn't have been as advanced as it is today and all that kind of stuff. But this is just a quick kind of concluding statement. But that's basically the idea, right? You have an introduction statement, then you talk about each scientist in terms of what they've done and give quite a bit of detail, and then you have a concluding statement, and this is what is required to get you 7 to 8 marks out of an 8-mark question. And where did that question come from? It came from this dot point. Describe the contributions of Pasteur and Koch to our understanding of infectious disease. The only thing that's really different to the question and this, here we've got describe, here we've got evaluate. Describe would have been maybe a 4-mark question, but evaluate turns into an 8-mark question. But I hope that was useful.